We'll move on now to the next paper, which will be from Shihao Yu, who's a PhD student at Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, and he's going to be talking about, does the consolidated feed matter? So over to you, Shihao.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Let me share my screen. It's just to double check. Can everybody actually see my screen? And my voice actually sounds right.
We can. You look great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Carol. And first of all, I would like to thank Carol and Mike and the Plato team for the conference and for including the paper in the program. So the paper I'm going to actually present is on the consolidated tape or feed. So first, just a bit motivation. So we know actually in the current US equities market, there are actually two very salient features. So first, the market is actually fast. So if you actually look at the paper of Mankfeld 2018, where he shows actually 20% of the trades arrive in less than 1 millisecond clusters. And the second feature is the market is very fragmented. If you actually look at the US equities market, now we have like 16 lead markets or national exchanges, plus dozens of dark pools, broker-dealer internalizers, or wholesalers. So given this kind of very fragmented and very fast market, and I hope everybody actually will agree that market data is actually very crucial. It's actually for every participant, for market makers, for arbitragers, for the buy side. But what is actually the current sort of market data structure for US equities? So now it's actually two-tiered market. So you have actually consolidated tape or the SIP feeds. They're actually slow, and I will get to actually institutional details later on why it's actually slow. So actually content-wise, it has on and off exchange trades plus actual quick updates from the top of the book. And it's relatively cheap and mainly consumed by unsophisticated traders. And there's actually the direct feeds, which are actually proprietary data products, so by the exchanges. And they're fast. Of course, they include actually the trades from the exchange and plus the quotes, not only actually from the top of the book, but actually from the whole book. So you see actually all order book events and actually also more. Some feeds have actually all out quotes and you also have auction balances, for example, the closing auctions, but they're actually expensive and they're actually mainly consumed by sophisticated traders, for example, HFTs and large investment banks. So this kind of two-tiered market structure has actually given rise to a very intense policy debates, right? So if you actually look at the US, the SEC is trying to kind of move from national market system 1.0 to 2.0. And a very large component of the overhaul is about the SIP. So we're actually thinking, trying to improve the SIP content-wise to, for example, include more depth information, add all-up quotes, add auction balances, and you have actually more SIPs. So you have sort of actually more competing consolidators for the actually consolidated feed. Across Atlantic, if you're actually Europe, we don't have actually a tape yet, but it's actually very much in the making. And the debate is not really about whether we should have one or not, but really actually what kind of tape that we actually would like to have, right? So whether we should have only a post-trade tape or we should have pre-trade or actually both. So the paper is sort of actually the whole data debate is very complicated, has many aspects. So the paper sort of actually take one step back and look at the current SIP for consolidated feeds in the US market and trying to understand what is actually the role that the consolidated feed actually play now. So a very popular narrative is actually the further improvements on the consolidated tape shouldn't actually matter so much because it's actually the two-tier market, right? So the HFTs consume direct feeds. They're not going to actually be affected. And the SIP is only kind of mainly used by display users. Think about when you actually go to your broker app, get the price quote from, let's say, Apple. That's actually the many sort of consumers on the tape. But there's also kind of counter evidences to the usage of the tape. So for example, actually data show that actually 45% of the dark pools in the US consume only SIP feed. And also reports show that actually SIP is actually more used by algo traders in, for example, cases where they actually use the SIP for data integrity check. For example, actually there is a study looking at the flash crash in 2010 that is actually very corrupted SIP actually further sort of make traders to withdraw from the markets. And also I think the recent paper by Thomas, who is actually presenting this afternoon, they look actually the off-exchange trades containing the SIP, and they show that actually traders do respond to the actually off-exchange trades containing the SIP. So essentially, how can we actually tackle the question, right? Whether the tape matters or not? What I do is actually to have a very sort of standard diff and diff method based on two types of exogenous events. So the first event is actually a good event. So there's actually a speed upgrade to SIP. And the second one is actually a bad event where actually SIP suffer from technical glitches. So the actually SIP feeds are either not available or they're actually very corrupted. And to just give you a preview of the results, here's actually what I find. So when actually the SIP becomes faster, surprisingly, actually the market liquidity drops in terms of actually an increase in the spreads and a higher price impact. And move to the trading side, what I find is actually the algo trading activity actually picks up due to the SIP upgrade, which is actually proxied by the quote to trade ratio. But the high frequency trading activity, proxied by the strategic runs proposed by the Hagströmer and SAR paper, actually stay put. So basically, what I see is actually the non-attributive AT activity picks up. And combined with actually the decrease in liquidity, it seems to me actually the SIP, when they actually receive an upgrade, actually encourage more informed algo trading. And if actually move to the other negative events when the SIP is actually unavailable or corrupted, I find actually market liquidity drops, which is actually not so surprising, but in particular, actually the volume and order book depths actually are actually affected the most. So here actually kind of a paper in a nutshell. And now we actually get to sort of the details on the data, the approach. But before that, so the literature, I will skip it due to time constraint. So to understand how the empirical approach, the defensive actually can work, we have to first kind of get to know a bit institutional details about the SIP. So basically, there are actually two features. So there are actually two SIPs instead of actually one. So basically, if the stock is listed on a LIC, its message, call updates, trades have to be actually reported to a SIP managed by LIC. And if you're actually listed on NASDAQ, the message will be actually reported to a NASDAQ SIP. So basically, it doesn't really matter where the stock is traded. It only matters where you're actually listed, right? So if you're a NASDAQ stock traded in LIC exchange venues, your message has to be actually reported to NASDAQ. And a second feature for the current actually consolidated tape in the US is that there's kind of a very unique geography. So here's actually kind of a triangle area in New Jersey. So you can see that the SIPs, the two SIPs, the LIC SIP and the NASDAQ SIP, and the different national exchanges are sort of located in this kind of, let's call it New Jersey triangle. So here in Mawa, you have actually the LIC venues and LIC SIP. And down here in Carteret, you have the NASDAQ venues and NASDAQ SIP. And here in Secaucus, you have the dark pools, IEX, and CBOE venues, for example, the BATS. So the location actually matters because if you think about the latency in the SIP, it contains actually two components, right? First of all, the SIP has to aggregate messages from all exchanges. Of course, you suffer from the aggregation or processing latency, but it's not only about that, because the message has to travel from the exchange to the SIP. So you also suffer actually geographic latency. So a very simple example is actually, if you think about SIP feed subscriber here in Mawa, and I'm trading NASDAQ stock. So for a message in NASDAQ stock on actually LIC venues, it has to first travel all the way from Mawa here to Carteret, get processed by the NASDAQ SIP, and then actually travel back to the subscriber, right? So that's suffered sort of actually 2 times the geographic latency and then plus the processing latency. So that's actually sort of actually a bit institutional details on the SIP. And the first event where I look at is there's actually kind of a speed upgrade. So essentially actually they move the NASDAQ SIP to INET, which is the proprietary technology of NASDAQ. So the speed and capacity of the NASDAQ SIP increases. As a result, the processing latency of the NASDAQ, right, the aggregation time actually needed drops significantly from 350 microseconds to less than actually 20. So what's actually the implications? So first, as I mentioned, the NASDAQ SIP is actually responsible for NASDAQ stocks, right? So that means just in general, the feeds for NASDAQ stocks actually become faster. And the second implication is a little bit subtle. So I will actually also use an example to show you why the speed upgrade should actually affect the trading of Nasdaq stocks on the Nasdaq exchanges more so compared to the trading on LICE. So let's say Björn is a direct fee subscriber. He's always co-locating to the exchanges. So if you think about trading Nasdaq stocks on Nasdaq venues, for example, your actions over here, for Björn, he obtained direct feeds. So he actually has the lowest latency, it's less than 20 microseconds. And for me, I get actually the SIP I get data from the SIP. There's actually no geographic latency because the message from Nasdaq venues can just actually go to Nasdaq SIP without actually suffering from the geographic latency. And so after the upgrades, the processing latency component drops significantly, right? So for me, it's quite happy. I have actually very large relative reduction in my latency. But if you think about trading Nasdaq stocks on actually nice venues, for Björn, he collocates, so, and also he listens to the direct bits, so there should be actually no impact on him. But for me, I still actually got kind of a speed upgrade because my processing time actually still drops. But I still actually suffer from the geographic latency, right? So the message still has to travel actually first to LICE venues to Nasdaq SIP and back. So for me, I got some upgrades, but actually not so much relatively. So that's why I try to argue actually the upgrade should actually affect the trading on Nasdaq exchanges, actually more so. So I hope after the institutional details, now I think we're ready to talk about the identification strategy. And what I do is, because the upgrade only have to the Nasdaq SIP, so it should actually only affect the Nasdaq stocks. So basically what I do, I have actually a sample of Nasdaq stocks matched with LICE listed stocks on price, volume, market capitalization, and the industry. And then I just run a simple diff and diff, right? So after the speed upgrades. And the interaction term after Nasdaq stock is actually the variable that we care about. And we want to see if after the upgrade, we should see actually a significant diff and diff effect from the gamma parameter here. And going to sort of the geographic latency example I told you earlier, I should expect the diff and diff effect to be actually more pronounced on the Nasdaq exchanges. So basically add a triple interaction term to look at if the diff and diff result in the first equation is actually more sort of pronounced on the Nasdaq value. So I look at the coefficient gamma 3, which capture the triple diff effect. So basically, to actually look at the impact of SIP, I have a bunch of actually Y variables there. I look at liquidity, which are actually very commonly used in the literature, the spreads, the depth, and the trading volume. And those actually from the LICE tech. And also look at the trading. So I look at the share of intermarket sweeping orders. And also look at the all-out share. And for the algorithmic trading activity, I use two proxies, the cancel to trade and order to trade ratio. So cancel to trade ratio is just the number of cancel messages divided by the number of trades. And order to trade is just actually the volume from the let's say the limit order additions compared to the trading volume. And the for the HFT activity, the proxy I use actually the strategic runs proposed by Hagströmer and SAR paper in 2013. So essentially you look at order book events and you just track the order submissions, cancellations, and resubmissions. So that actually kind of mimics the order book strategies by the HFTs to kind of constantly update their quotes, responding to new information. And just actually kind of quick notes, because the latency issue, when I compute all those kind of liquidity measures from the tech database, I don't actually use the SIP data timestamps, but actually the participant timestamps of the tech. So that actually step is not actually suffer from the latency, because for the message disseminated or reported from one exchange to the SIP, they step actually the message at their own a mention engine. And I think this time step is actually more accurate in terms of actually computing on MBBOs and BBOs. And for the SIP glitches, essentially I look at also liquidities to see how actually the SIP glitches actually affect the market. And just as a quick note, because by definition, during those SIP glitches, you can't actually have the data, or you don't have actually reliable data for the consolidated tape. So I got actually direct feeds from Main Street, a US data company, so I can actually look at what actually happened in the market without actually using the data from the tape. All right, so now actually comes to the results. So first actually look at the last SIP upgrades. And the first table actually reports the diff and diff estimation results on the liquidity variables. So, I mean, the overall picture shows that actually after the upgrade, I see a deterioration of liquidity. So if you look at the spreads, the quality spreads, effective spreads, and the price impact actually increases. So the numbers here in the table are in absolute terms, so in basis points. Just to give you sort of the economic magnitude, I just divided those divide by those sort of a basis point measures by the unconditional mean to just get to kind of percentage increase. So basically, I would say that actually liquidity deterioration is sort of mild, right? So for those spread measures, they're like 6, 4, 5% increase. And just actually one thing I wanted to mention is that although the price impact actually increases, but we also actually see the increase in the transaction cost, right? So basically, if you look at the realized spread, which is actually a popular measure for market maker profits, they actually stay put. So essentially, you have actually more sort of informed trading flows attracted by the last SIP upgrades, but the market makers also kind of actually widen the spread to compensate for the actual risk. So in terms of the impact maybe on market makers, which are actually dominated by the HFT, it seems to be actually okay. And the interpretation of that I want to actually combine with the results here on the trading, right? So if you remember that I look at the liquidity variables and also the trading variables. So here you see is the cancel to trade, the order to trade ratio has actually a sort of a very significant increase, right? In percentage wise, they're actually double digits. So if you actually believe that this tool captures AT or algorithmic trading activities, this seems to actually increase or pick up quite a lot due to the upgrade. And in terms of HFT activity, proxied by the strategic wrong measure, there's no change. So if you actually kind of combine the liquidity results that we actually see before in the last slides, that there's higher price impact, and also here on the trading that we actually see there is a pickup in the AT activity or algo activity. It seems to me actually the storyline is about that actually the SIP upgrades encourages sort of actually more informed trading from the institutional traders who might actually use algos for the execution purposes. So I think that's actually the sort of the key interpretation that I actually want to share from the diff and diff results. And for the triple diff, if you still remember, I'm trying to actually look at the diff and diff results comparing the Nasdaq stocks versus NYSE, but now also compare the diff and diff on the Nasdaq venue versus the NYSE venues, right? So I actually want to look at if the triple action interaction term here is significant or not. So you actually see that the effective spread actually increases and also the price impact. So it seems actually the liquidity of Nasdaq stocks, I think here I should be more precise. It's actually really kind of Nasdaq stock versus NYSE, right? So the diff and diff is more pronounced on Nasdaq exchanges due to the sort of the example I shared before that the latency is actually reduced the most for a trader actually trading Nasdaq stocks on Nasdaq exchange. And it's actually the same I find for the two AT measures, the algo trader activity measures. So it's quite actually interesting if you look at the coefficients here. So it's really actually the triple interaction term that captures the increase in the AT activities, right? So if you actually look at the Nasdaq volumes, the quote-to-trade ratio actually drops. But for Nasdaq stocks, there seems to be nothing happening there. So it's actually really that about the trading in Nasdaq stocks on the Nasdaq venues that actually has an increase in the AT activities. So I think the sort of triple diff and diff result just confirmed what we actually find that there's actually an overall increase in AT activities, and combined with the results from the liquidity side that those AT activities are also actually quite informed. So here, just kind of several robustness checks I have done. I will actually skip them. So now actually we can sort of actually move to the SAP glitches. So you're right, we're actually talking about happy events that the SIP received upgrade, but actually unhappy events would actually suffer from glitches. So here I actually find 3 recent market-wide SIP glitches. So here are some kind of basic information about those glitches. In general, I think the duration is actually quite short, right? So it's not like last a few hours, but normally just less than half hour. And the good thing about the 3 glitches is actually having both on last and SIP, and sorry, the license SIP. And also, important feature is actually there's no market-wide trading halt, which is actually different from, if the audience do remember, back in 2013, there's actually they call it last act flash phrase. So basically there's actually a very severe glitch happen on the last act SIP that actually makes the whole trading on last act listed stocks actually in a halt. But for all the glitches here I look at, there's actually no market-wide trading halt. So the trading still happens, but it's just the SIP data feeds you get are either actually unavailable or they're actually corrupted. So I think this is actually perfect setting where we can look at the impact of the SIP feeds on the market functionality. Right, so the identification strategy is actually the same as before, because if you actually look at the glitch events I look at, for each of them, they only actually affect only one SIP, right? So the first event only affects the last SIP, and the other 2 only affects the license SIP. So that means when the last SIP, for example, is actually affected, that means only last stocks are actually affected in terms of their consolidated feed, but not the license stocks. So I have sort of a natural control and treatment groups where I can do, again, a different diff. So essentially, I first actually pull all the 3 events and just look at whether the sort of traded stocks or affected stocks experience actually the liquidity deterioration, which is actually the case here. So if you look at the liquidity results, I would say the effect is actually very significant, and especially if you look at the volume and the depth on the in the order book, both actually on the top of the book and also actually depth across 5 levels of the book, right? So when the SIP is actually unavailable or corrupted, that the volume drops relative to the conditional mean about like 17%. And for the depth on the NBBO, it drops actually even more, about like 20%. So I would say actually the impact of SIP on the market is actually not very small. So this is actually the results where I actually pull all the SIP glitches events. Just as sort of a minor further identification, I zoom into the first SIP glitch. The different diff here is possible because for the SIP for the last SIP, they disseminate the feeds in different channels according to the alphabet order of the stocks, right? So for actually those ticker symbols, they actually are disseminated in the odd number channels. And for those ticker symbols, they actually are disseminated in the even number channels. And during the actual event, the glitch happened sequentially, first actually to those early channels and then to the late channels. So essentially, if I can compare whether during, let's say, after the beginning of the first glitch, but before the second, do I actually see sort of liquidity drops more for those tickers in the early channels versus actually tickers in the late channels? So here's actually what I find. So here the different diffs. Essentially, I compared the stocks in the in early channels, which are actually first affected by the glitch, versus the stocks in the late channels. And we care actually about the coefficient here, the gamma 1, which captures the different diff effect for the first time period. And what I actually find here is the quality spread actually draws for both the early and late channels. So perhaps there is actually sort of a contagion effect actually from those stocks in the early channels to the late channels. But I do actually see that the effective spread actually increases for those stocks, and especially in terms of the volume and in terms of the depth. So my interpretation of the results is about that maybe for those traders who really kind of monitor the data feeds, that they actually see that the SIP data feeds are actually corrupted or available. If you think about HFTs who are actually constantly making the market and they use sort of SIP feeds as their data integrity check, after they see that that SIP data is no longer sort of reliable, I think maybe the first thing you want to do is to sort of actually withdraw from the market by canceling your limit orders, submissions in the order book. Just kind of put off in the market to protect yourself actually from the further risk in the market. There might be actually another kind of trading halt. And the drop in volume, I think, can actually be quite like predicted, because if you think about the SIP data feeds, which are actually consumed by, let's say, the retail investors or unsophisticated small traders, they just don't have actually data available for their trading, right? So it just makes sense for actually them to not able to trade. So I don't think it's actually very surprising that we actually see a drop or significant drop in terms of the volume. All right, so I think I have actually a few minutes left, so we're just trying to conclude. So I think the study actually look at the two exogenous events happen actually to SIP. So we actually look at a speed upgrade to the last SIP, and also actually look at a few technical glitches happens to the SIP. And the conclusion is that for faster SIP, you don't actually see liquidity improves. It's not actually a happy ending. So basically what we see is actually there's a mild deterioration in terms of market liquidity, and combined with the increase in the price impacts and increase in the algorithmic trading activities. And it seems to me actually the faster SIP leads to actually more informed institutional traders to actually use the SIP feeds and to trade. Hence, we have actually a high price impact and a deterioration in the liquidity. And for the glitches event, I think the results are actually quite sort of straightforward. We just see actually the market liquidity drops a lot. Last, I want to actually mention a little bit about what can we actually sort of learn from the study on the current SIP, and what actually the implications for National Market System 2.0. So apparently now I show that just speed up the single SIP does not actually seem to help the market, right? If you actually believe the story that the market actually liquidity drops. And in terms of the sort of actually latency improvement, the competing SIPs proposed by the SEC is actually kind of a further step to reduce the latency, right? So before, if you remember that the upgrade is only about the processing latency, the geographic latency still actually persists. And now they try to have kind of more SIPs, maybe one. So you have sort of, you don't have to actually, if you trade, let's say, a LIC stock on Nasdaq exchange, then it's travel to the LIC again. So you have actually a SIP aggregated there directly. So in a sense, you don't have actually the geographic latency anymore. But I'm not sure if that's kind of a desirable, because if you believe HFTs can always get kind of faster and better market data, but again, sort of actually increase the speed of the data feeds consumed by, let's say, algo traders, or should I say non-HFT algo traders, you might actually create more restful arm race, I think, between these two. And that actually might not really actually improve the market. And in terms of the more content, for example, I mentioned that for the National Market System 2.0 proposal, they're trying to include more content, all-out quotes, depth of the book, and auction imbalances. But unfortunately, I don't think my paper can speak actually on that matter. But in general, I think we should actually carefully think about the market data design and its possible actual implications for the market. Yeah, that's actually pretty much about my presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Shihao. To discuss the paper, we have Björn Hagströmer from Stockholm University. So if we can switch over to Björn to hear his thoughts on the paper.
Thank you, Carol. Can you see my slides and hear my voice?
We can, thank you.
Excellent. And thanks also to Plato for putting up this conference every year. I think it's great for the European market structure discussion. And Shihao did a great job in introducing this and presenting this paper. So I'll summarize it quickly and then turn to my comments. First of all, I think it is of obvious interest to the European market structure debate that is currently focusing a lot on the consolidated tape here. And it's great to have papers like this one, because otherwise we would be left with theory or speculation about what to do. And I think we can learn a lot from this paper. So let me get to the summary. We're talking about the US consolidated feed, and it should be clear that this is a both pre-trade and post-trade feed. So it doesn't distinguish the effects of the pre-trade and post-trade data. There are two types of events. There's the speed upgrade of the NASDAQ part of the consolidated tape in 2016 that leads to a slight increase in illiquidity. And then there is a set of glitches in the SIP consolidated tape operation, and Shihao shows that these lead to increased illiquidity of a greater magnitude than the speed upgrade. And we see it in the spreads, but most of all in the depths and in the reduced trading volume. So overall, I think it's a very timely topic, and Shihao does a great job in identifying the effects of these events. And there's a huge data effort here. I think he's collecting trade and quote data at the very highest frequency from 4 different databases. So that's quite impressive. And also taken together, this makes for very interesting results. So here's the speed upgrade plot, and I want to bring to your attention first, perhaps for the European context. Note on the y-axis you see the microseconds. We're talking hundreds of microseconds, like going from 350 down to 20 microseconds processing latency, and the geographic latency for traveling between data centers in New Jersey were on the scale of hundreds of microseconds as well. And that is comparable to the distances that if you travel within London, say going between the airports in London, it's a similar distance. That can be a terrible journey, I'm sure, but for a quote update in a fiber optic cable, that's a quick journey. And when we are talking about the consolidated tape in Europe, data is going to travel between Paris and Frankfurt and Stockholm and so on. Then we're going to talk milliseconds. So it's a different order of magnitude. Back to this paper, you can see in this plot the latency of the NYSE SIP and the NASDAQ SIP, and there are several speed events, but Shihao is focusing on the biggest one in 2016. And where we can expect the largest effect. And I think the identification here is really great. So Shihao is comparing the market quality before that speed upgrade to after, of course. Then he can also compare the effect of the NASDAQ stocks that are subject to this upgrade to the NYSE listed stocks that are not affected. And then, as a third difference, he can compare the market quality at NASDAQ for these NASDAQ stocks to the market quality of the NASDAQ stocks when they are trading at NYSE. So that's a triple diff in diff that makes for great identification. So I think we can really trust the results coming out of this exercise. So let's turn to those results and start with price dislocation, which is the fact that when prices change, they will change in the direct data feeds before they show up on the SIP. So we get price dislocations when the SIP differs from the direct data feed. And as expected, the duration of these differences shrinks abruptly around the event, as you can see here. And from roughly 200 microseconds to about 20 microseconds. And on the right-hand plot, we see that the number of such dislocations also goes down in a way that we could expect. So that's good. There's something going on in the event. And then what does this do to illiquidity? And here we see that there are significant coefficients on the spread measures. The quoted and the effective spread go up, and so does the price impact. And Shihao calculated that these changes are about 5% in relative terms. So it's not a huge change, but still interesting that illiquidity worsens when the speed is upgraded. I don't think it's all clear on how to interpret this. So this will be my first comment. I have two lines of thinking for the interpretation. The first one is most consistent with what Shihao talked about. So I drew here an axis of latency where to the left we have those who access the direct feed, and to the right we have those who access the SIP feed. So this is the two-tier market that Shihao talked about in the beginning, with the HFTs and the major investment banks who can afford to pay for the fastest possible connection, and then everyone else who rely on the much cheaper SIP feed. Now, for the change in SIP feed latency to make any difference at all, someone needs to be influenced in terms of the relative speed. I think the story is. So when we get a new SIP latency, all of these here, they move to the, my pen doesn't work very well. They move to the left, and those, if it's a strictly two-tier market, then the relative speed doesn't matter because they are still slower than the direct data feed. Only case when it could change the relative speed is if there is someone in between, before the event, someone in between the old SIP latency and the new SIP latency. And that could be the case. This two-tier world that was described is not always true. When I studied HFTs in the Stockholm market some years ago, we measured the speed of reaction for different HFTs, and we found that there are different tiers within the HFTs as well. So the black line in that plot is the fastest HFT, and the red line is the 5 fastest HFTs that are markedly slower. And then there is a bunch of about 10 others who are actually quite slow, but still doing HFT operations. So there is scope for having someone in between. Shihao tried to measure what they are. I'm not so convinced about these different metrics for algorithmic trading and high frequency trading. I don't think they are specific enough to capture different types of strategies in the HFT space. I think you need to think more about how to nail this. My alternative story or interpretation of the results is that the fact that the market makers increase their spreads following the event must tell us that market makers lose in some way in the event. And I'm thinking that the market makers may be moonlighting as latency arbitrageurs as well, that they make money on the time difference between the direct feed and the SIP feed. And we can think of these price dislocations on the previous slide as latency arbitrage opportunities. And then what we see is that there are fewer of those and they are more short-lived. So maybe there is something there. It would be great if you could try to measure latency arbitrage. We can talk afterwards about ways to do that. I'm also interested in the variance of the SIP latency. We saw a level shift, but traders also care about the variability in that measure, I think. So if they lose their latency arbitrage business, they will compensate for that by increasing their spread. So maybe that is what's going on. Briefly about the SIP glitches, there are a set of these that are less than 1 hour each. And here, Shihao is finding stronger results of reduced liquidity and also reduced trading volume. So these are disruptive to market quality, but for a brief period of time. It would be good to look into more on who is reducing volume. I think dark pool volume would be directly observable, if that could be that they are shutting down their operation, waiting for the SIP to come back up. Maybe the retail brokers shut down or are delayed. So you have a method for identifying retail trades in the paper. So I think it would be nice to see that in volume terms. And then finally, I want to mention here that some papers, other papers than this one, they use glitches as a way of comparing what the market would be without a certain functionality. And Shihao does not push the paper in that way. And I think that is very good, because a glitch is a glitch. And what we learn from a glitch event should be what happens to market quality in a glitch. It does not give us a comparison of what the market is like with and without a consolidated tape on a longer term. So we shouldn't use this as a comparison of what to expect of introducing a consolidated tape. It's great that you don't push that too far. To conclude, the question was if the consolidated tape matters. The answer is yes, it does. The latency of the consolidated tape matters, but not so much. It's quite marginal, and that I think is interesting to the debate here, because we're debating if we should have a pre-trade consolidated tape, and one problem with that is the latency of it. And this evidence here shows us that some latency in that is perhaps not too bad. And then glitches have stronger liquidity effects. They're quite disruptive to market quality. So that tells us it should be important to ensure the stability of the consolidated tape when designing it. So thank you very much. Great paper. Good job, Shihao.
Thank you very much, Björn. A reminder to the audience, you can send through questions on the web chat. We don't have any questions as yet, so I will give Shihao a brief moment to respond to Björn if you would like. Otherwise, we can wrap up and move into the breakout rooms. Shihao, would you like to make any brief remarks?
Yes, I would like to first, of course, thank Björn for the great discussion. Just very briefly, I think, yeah, actually, it's also, I'm trying very hard to kind of interpret the results, especially I think your spectrum of the latency graph is super important. Like, if you really believe in this kind of two-tier markets, who is actually in between, right? Because when I'm actually trying to write an interpretation of the results, I'm more thinking sort of not really kind of the top tier investment banks, but maybe sort of medium-sized buy side. And I'm not sure whether those are actually the people who actually rely on the CFDs to do the execution. So I think that's actually, I'm looking forward to tomorrow's panel discussion on the tape. So maybe I can get actually more industry insights from the people in the panel. So I think maybe there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Shihao. So that draws us to the end of the formalities for the session. So let me thank Thierry, Xiang, Shihao, and Björn. We do have, as I mentioned at the beginning, breakout rooms set up. You can either hold on the line for this room, and in a few moments, a link will come up for you to select which breakout room you want to join. So there'll be two breakout rooms, one to talk to Thierry and Xiang, and one to talk to Shihao and Björn. So you can join those. If you need to momentarily leave and then come back, you can also find a link to the breakout room on the conference website. So feel free also to rejoin from those sessions. But if you stay on the line, Open Exchange should bring up that link now.